Українська громада Канади на чолі із науково-освітним центром вивчання Голодомору вже багато років працюють над тим, щоб інформувати світ про геноцид в Україні. Ця праця дала плідні результати. Недавно у Вінніпезі проходила науково-освітня конференція для вчителів канадських шкіл, щоб ознайомити педагогів із методикою викладання теми Голодомору.
Але я багато пам'ятаю із мого пережиття. Я пам'ятаю, як мій дід помер, його везли на кладовище. І як ми приїхали туди, то там мої родичі викопали йому яму. Але як ми приїхали туди, там була підвода, і було багато мертвих людей. І кинули всі в ту яму, присипали трошки землею, а потім поставили домовинку мого діда. Це була велика трагедія. І моя тьотя, мого батька сестра, її чоловік помер з голоду. Вона мала 4 дітей, не могла їх вже втримати. Вона повезла їх до Києва і там лишила їх. Казала зачекати, поки вона прийде назад. Сама стояла за вуглом і чекала, поки поліція забрала тих дітей. І ми її більше ніколи не бачили.
А дітей ви потім знайшли чи ні?
Ні. Вони їх забрали до приюту.
Чи ви знаєте, чи ті діти вижили?
Ні, ми нічого не знаємо. Багато дітей було, що батьки їздили по приютах, шукали. Дехто знайшов, але решта пропали без вісті.
А що з вашою тіткою сталося?
Вона десь померла, ніхто не знає де.
В Канадському музеї прав людини над берегом Червоної ріки у Вінніпезі проходила освітня конференція про Голодомор, організована науково-освітнім центром вивчення Голодомору при Канадському інституті українських студій в Альберті.
Мета цієї конференції є поширити знання про Голодомор і так само скликати українських, не тільки українських, а канадських учителів, щоб вони більше довідалися про Голодомор. І тоді вони би включили тему Голодомору у навчальні програми у школах канадських, де вони викладають. І вже у деяких провінціях тема є включена. Але вчителям треба так само навчитися, як це робити, дещо про Голодомор самий. І так само вивчити методику, яка є інноваційна, цікава і інтерактивна для дітей.
Освітня конференція про Голодомор розпочалася офіційним відкриттям у Канадському музеї прав людини у Вінніпезі. На відкриття конференції прибули член парламенту із Манітоби Джеймс Безан, президент Канадського музею прав людини доктор Джон Янг, член законодавчої асамблеї Транскони Блер Якимоський і декан факультету освіти при університеті Манітоби доктор Дейвід Мандзюк. Ведучою церемонії була директор освітнього напрямку науково-освітнього центру вивчення Голодомору Валентина Курилів.
Welcome, вітаємо, bienvenue à Winnipeg. Part of the mandate HREC has is to try to bring awareness about the Holodomor through its education component by developing programs and materials for teachers and students, and works to ensure that the Holodomor is represented in the school curriculum across Canada. The research component engages scholars from a wide range of disciplines in expanding knowledge about the Holodomor through its publications and academic conferences.
We're particularly pleased to welcome the Holodomor Research and Education Consortium to the museum. There's so many important intersections and common purposes in our work. For those of you who don't know, the mandate of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights is to cultivate dialogue and reflection on human rights themes. And one of the critical memories we share as Canadians is the Holodomor. The extermination by hunger, the killing by starvation, the murder by famine in Ukraine by the Soviet government. This genocide followed 2 earlier famines in the 1920s, the persecution and liquidation of Ukrainian priests, and the eradication of the intelligentsia, the scholars, artists, poets, writers, by the Soviet government. Soviet police and collaborators confiscated food supplies in much of Ukraine. They denied starving people access to stored grain, to relief efforts, and opportunities to travel, to flee the country, and to find food elsewhere. And then, over the next 50 years, as Valentina noted, the Soviet Union and others, including some individuals here in Canada, suppressed evidence and suppressed discussion of this genocide. And while the Holodomor happened in a different time and in a different place, it continues to intersect with our identity as Canadians.
We know that, as Dr. Young just laid out, there's too many people that aren't aware of this genocide, one of the largest that has been perpetrated against humanity. And it's important that each and every one of us take up the cause to educate, to raise public awareness. By Parliament passing my private member's bill to recognize the Holodomor, not just to have a Memorial Day on the fourth Saturday of every November, but to recognize it as a genocide is critical to how we as society function, is critical on how we inform ourselves and the next generations, and it's critical to ensure that history does not repeat itself.
On behalf of the Honourable Ian Wishart, Minister of Education, and the Department of Education and Training, I extend my congratulations to HREC and its Director of Education, Valentina, as well as to the organizers, participating teachers, presenters, and community members.
As you know, in 2008, Canada was, and this has been referenced already, I very much appreciated the very moving words of Mr. Bazan, was the first country to recognize the Holodomor as a genocide, and as such, it's also established the National Ukrainian Famine of Genocide Memorial Day Act, and this was due in large part to the efforts of Mr. Bazan and others who lobbied the Conservative government of the time and brought forward Bill C-459, which has already been mentioned. We've gathered here the next few days to talk about how we can continue to raise awareness about this time in our history and learn more about how teachers are teaching about it at the early, middle, and senior years levels. To those teachers who'll be presenting this afternoon, kudos to you. I'm sure there's a lot that we can learn from your experiences.
Валентина Курилів також зачитала привітальне звернення від міністра освіти Онтаріо Митці Гантер.
On behalf of the Ontario Ministry of Education, I would like to extend my best wishes to the participants, volunteers, and organizers of the Holodomor Education Conference Education Awareness Action. The work of the Holodomor Research and Education Consortium to provide information and resources on human rights and the Holodomor is vital to our understanding of history and our ability to learn from it. It is my hope that the conference will provide educators with access to methods and strategies that will enhance teaching and learning about this significant world event.
Зразу після відкриття конференції учасники мали змогу послухати лекцію доктора Джойс Апсел, яку представив присутнім дорадник президента Канадського музею прав людини доктор Клинт Карл.
Dr. Apsel is author of Introducing Peace Museums, 2016. She was nominated for the 2017 Dayton Literary Peace Prize in Nonfiction. She's the co-editor of Genocide Matters, Ongoing Issues and Challenges, 2014, and other writings on education, children's rights, and comparative genocide. She's director of the Genocide and Human Rights Annual Summer Program, sponsored by the Zorian Institute at the University of Toronto.
Part of what we are attempting to do today and in the following days is to come up and think about ways in which to make the Holodomor and other cases of human wrongs and issues of human rights woven into the classroom space in an effective way. This presentation is also undertaken with the goal of helping to introduce the concept of difficult subjects and what are sometimes referred to as difficult histories and risky stories into the classroom, into the museum. Certainly this is a central part of their dialogue here, helping students to, quote, learn and to weave a world for themselves. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge not to exploit students' emotional vulnerability. Teachers have the difficult challenge of helping students assimilate these stories and the facts into their lives and communities and making them intelligible. Students may ask, did this really happen? Could it happen again? Is it happening again? How could human beings do this to other human beings, something we've all thought of? What action can I take? And then, of course, there are the students, the silence, the students who are thinking about or afraid to raise issues. And silence, of course, is a very important part of the history of genocide and of the history of the Holodomor. State institutions, perpetrators, powerful leaders, newspaper men and women have all been part of denial, and certainly that was very much the case in the Holodomor. How can we make the classroom environment engaged space, safe place to explore difficult topics? How to begin a section on human rights and genocide? And clearly, one of the ways is to point out to students that human rights and human wrongs are inextricably linked. Another is that human rights are against the grain of history. What do I mean by against the grain of history? That most of history is that of the history of privilege based on birth, gender, power. So that introducing human rights, which is the way that I teach my courses, first I introduce human rights, and then I introduce human wrongs. The state of emergency in which we live is not the exception, but the rule. That the ongoing crisis and ongoing destructive processes, some appropriately called genocide, others mass atrocities or other names of them, are part and parcel of human history. And the Holodomor is part and parcel of that history as well.
Після рекламної паузи ми продовжимо розповідь про науково-освітню конференцію про Голодомор, організовану науково-освітним центром вивчення Голодомору при Канадському інституті українських студій в Альберті. Ми продовжуємо нашу розповідь звіт про науково-освітню конференцію про Голодомор, організовану науково-освітним центром вивчення Голодомору, яка проходила у травні цього року у Вінніпезі. Методика викладання теми Голодомору у школах була одною з ключових тем у програмі конференції.
Після першої сесії відбулася дискусія, в якій взяло участь 6 панелістів. Модератором дискусії був доктор Ричард Геште.
So our lessons from the Holodomor. This is more than atrocities. We've got lots of atrocities to go around, more than we need, and all the kind of machinations of humankind. It's more than history. What's at stake here, in my perspective, in my humble perspective, is less, in some ways, the rights of humans than the right to be human. And I think that what was taken away in this kind of totalizing paranoid ideology, which always, these ideologies always seem to start the same way. We identify an enemy, we say, these people annoy us, then we say, we might be better off without them. Oh yes, we are better off without them, right? And then we go and say, well, we actually have a technology to do away with them. And we are very clever as human beings at working our way through that logic. This is one of the calculuses that Joyce was talking about. The other is that all these ideologies have an internal logic, even though the ideology itself is illogical. And it's certainly illogical from the sense of the right to be human.
My role at the museum is to develop education programming from kindergarten to grade 12 and undergraduate university students. Most of our students come to the museum for a few hours. If we are lucky, they stay for a full day, and even luckier, they stay for a couple of days. So our challenge as museum educators is to try and motivate, inspire, teach students in that very, very short period of time that they are with us. And we use our stories in the museum to do that. One of those very important stories we tell, of course, is the story of the Holodomor. And as Dr. Young said earlier, it's an important part of our collective history that we need to study and remember. Education on genocide involves just that, the study and analysis of a genocide while framing it as a moral failure and a violation against humanity.
What I'm going to look at today and share with you are not so much about teaching about the Holodomor per se, not what was the Holodomor and so on, but genocide education, Holodomor education as part of a healing process, but also to take care about how we go about doing it and thinking about the effects and the impact that it'll have on the participants, teachers, and so forth. And of course, there's other people that have experienced violence, whether it's family violence or even in Canada, malnutrition, lack of food. There are children who go to school who don't have, as was mentioned, a set place to go, or where access to food is a daily battle, insufficient food, insufficient clothing. So when we talk about famine, when we talk about violence, these can be triggers for those individuals. There's often a tendency to banish or not talk about those negative experiences or the atrocities that have happened or the trauma we've experienced as a result of war. The term unspeakable, this quote is, they're unspeakable. And certainly many of the Holocaust survivors. By the way, the Holocaust affected many people. There were 6 to 7 million Jews, but another 6 to 7 people of other ethnic backgrounds and groups, including Slavs, a great number of Slavs who were also targets of Nazis. So Ukrainians are part of that group, and there were a substantial number of Ukrainians that were killed as part of the Nazi agenda.
I'd like to acknowledge also that I'm on Treaty 1 land, and every time I acknowledge that, I'm acknowledging not only the past, but I'm also acknowledging the present. And that's very much a part of studying history and social studies in Manitoba. We are always linking those two, as Dr. Young pointed out, it's that intersection of the past and the present, and certainly looking at the Holodomor and other genocides that have occurred. That's exactly what we're doing with our students. One way we inspire our teachers is we are now part of a pan-Canadian movement, and it's to build global competencies. I'd like to think of them in general as the 4 C's. So critical thinking, citizenship, creativity, and communication skills. So just as we said, now that you know, what can you do? It's these skills that will give students the efficacy to look at issues and then respond to them. They have to help them have the ability to navigate and succeed in today's complex and interconnected world. We offer PD opportunities to help build those global competencies. So peace literacy is one of our new initiatives that we're working on. We've been working with a gentleman from the States, and I see you nodding, Paul Chappelle, and he's come to speak to consultants at Manitoba Education, and we are looking at offering programs for our students. Using the quote that you may have heard from the founder of the United Nations, if war can be built in the minds of human beings, then so can peace. That's basically a summary of what peace literacy is all about.
The first challenge is that it's difficult to teach the Holodomor without an extensive study of the history of the relationship between the Ukraine and the Soviet Union. Most genocides at least begin by the leadership within that nation acting on their own. Normally, we start with an exploration of who a group of people were and why they were being attacked by their own government. The Holodomor has that element for the students to comprehend, but we also have to look at the complexities about the relationship between the Ukraine and the Soviet Union. And that can be very difficult for the students to do because, well, that's more of a doctoral thesis than 1 or 2 students at than 1 or 2 periods at the high school level. There are very few students in my school that have experienced true starvation. And this empathy and understanding of the real situation faced is a huge issue. There's always the problem of money. And with people, not only from the Ukrainian community, but from businesses and organizations, from the Canadian society, people who care about Canadian students, my students, learning about human rights, learning about the atrocities that have been committed, and learning the lessons of it so that we don't see that in the future, even though it's happening right now as we speak. Money from other individuals, businesses, and organizations would allow us access to any of the amazing resources that are out there, like the Holodomor mobile classroom. One of our course resources that inspired this main assignment was a pamphlet put out by the Holodomor Research and Education Consortium. And it's about the Holodomor Memorial Day in schools. And it forced me to ask the question of why don't we have one at my school? Why don't we have a Memorial Day in school? So I put that to my students, and the assignment, was to put together a group of proposals to then submit to the administration to have a Holodomor Memorial Day in schools, in our school. And that is going to be happening next year.
I'd like to just bring attention to two sets of terms and other concepts that certainly deserve a certain amount of reflective attention for various different reasons. The first is ubiquitous in genocide studies, and that is the construct of perpetrators, victims, and bystanders, which grew out of Raoul Hilberg's 1992 publication by that same name, and has since been modified by the addition of such terms as rescuer and upstander. Used with considerable care not to oversimplify and therefore trivialize, it can be helpful for broadly defining the actors in some types of genocide in their historical setting. Suffice it to say, as many scholars have indicated, that these terms are not necessarily very meaningful for genocides perpetrated in communist regimes. The term of bystanders, upstanders, and rescuers do have some potential of bringing relevance to some historical genocides for considering values and behavior in the present, as well as in the discussion of human rights today, which obviously are actionable. The second set deals with how we receive information that affects how we choose to act in social and political environments. A, formal education versus indoctrination when it's meant to be accepted uncritically. B, neutral information generated by governments or other powerful stakeholders versus propaganda if it is designed to manipulate opinions. And C, factual information versus disinformation or fake information from anyone we might want to consider a trusted source. And I am using a photograph also that we can apply for examining, learning about the Holodomor, and we are also able to use that photograph to learn more about empathy and many other topics related to genocide studies, human rights studies, and trying to bring it close to having it meaningful for today, like the whole process of disinformation, for example, or concepts like that, things that were relevant in that day and are particularly relevant again now. We share this information and these painful memories so that we all may be vigilant, so that we all may make ourselves strong against the power of lies and ideologies of hate, so that we all strive to work together for the human dignity of all.
Після презентації панелістів присутні мали змогу задавати питання, щоб продовжити дискусію.
So when images like that are shown, how are you helping them to generate these questions that are meaningful for them?
It's a matter to some extent of selecting images that you think may give a story. Well, it's a very personal thing, because one of the slides that I had in my presentation, which I didn't show, was simply a photograph of a group of farmers it was sort of like just a portrait sitting in the field in 1932. And then when I read the caption, it said, all of these people died in the Holodomor. And it's like, whoa, you know, and that one photo, you know, seeing these real people, and I don't know, just, and then this is again, there's so much that each photograph can show, as long as you're careful to take something that you're not, you know, as Michael said, not using it for shock value. As some author had said, you know, it becomes an obscenity if you're just using photographs for shock value. We have to be very careful.
Після рекламної паузи ми продовжимо розповідь про науково-освітню конференцію про Голодомор, організовану науково-освітним центром вивчення Голодомору при Канадському інституті українських студій в Альберті. Канада офіційно визнала Голодомор в Україні як злочин проти українського народу, як геноцид. В школах Канади тема Голодомору додана до шкільних програми і вивчається на всіх шкільних рівнях.
Програма освітньої конференції про Голодомор проходила під гаслом «Освіта, усвідомлення, дія». Після короткої перерви розпочала роботу третя сесія на тему «Методи навчання про Голодомор». Одночасно відбувалося 3 презентації для вчителів «Методика викладання теми Голодомору у молодших, середніх або старших класах». Дуже цікаво про способи викладання для наймолодших школярів розповіла учитель з Едмонтону Наталія Онищук.
Teaching Holodomor is not so difficult for younger children if you use the right strategies. I, as a music teacher, love to start with music, and finding a song with lyrics that can bring out feelings and imagery is a great tool to having children understand. So I've written one song called Dry Tears, and I try to help the children understand what the lyrics mean. How do you feel? Do you feel sad? Do you feel happy? Do you feel hungry? Another song we wrote together with my grade 5 and 6 students is called Seeds of Hope, and it was in honor of Pani Talanchuka, Holodomor survivor. Other strategies we use is working within the classroom, finding a theme, and each classroom will use the same theme, but of course bring it to the child's level. Then we bring all of this art and song and poetry and literature together, and we'll make a gallery walk within our gym, hang them along the walls. Other students can come and take a look. And finally, we bring the whole school together and have a panacheda. We invite all the clergy, Ukrainian Catholic, Roman Catholic, and Ukrainian Orthodox all together. And we pray together a panacheda and also have student-led discussions, interviews with Pani Talanchuk, and often little presentations. The last component of our Holodomor education in elementary is a social justice component, giving back to the community, giving in some way so that the children feel that they're taking an active part in everything that they've learned and in helping make a peaceful and happy future.
На презентації для середніх класів вчитель із Вінніпегу Джеф Козак наголосив:
I often will use literature, so I will read with them some stories based in Holodomor where the characters are living through these events, and I find that it gives the students a good opportunity to make connections to the protagonist and find some common ground. Oftentimes they're the similar age to the characters, so it helps them to put themselves in their shoes.
Презентацію продовжила Ліз Пенькос та Ян Мартін із Канадського музею прав людини у Вінніпезі. Популярною була також сесія методики викладання про Голодомор для учнів старших класів, яку розпочала Тамара Kowalczyk, вчитель з Торонто.
So I've had the privilege of teaching the grade 12 genocide course at the Toronto Catholic District School Board over the last 5 years, and we're gathered here at this conference to talk about some of the methodology and resources that we can share to effectively teach students of all cultures about the Holodomor. So some of the things that we're talking about are, for instance, how to use quotations effectively to have students think about primary sources and how they inform our learning. We also look at the media and the media's role in propaganda and denying genocide, and also shedding the truth about the Holodomor. So there are many different things that we can do, such as look at propaganda posters, looking at articles, reading diaries of journalists. So these are all great resources for students to go through and use to help them inform their knowledge about the Holodomor. One thing that I try to focus on in my students is having them reflect on the Holodomor and what it means and what justice looks like. How do we respect the memory of all those victims of the Holodomor, the innocent victims? And one project that I'm sharing is my students all create a memorial. After learning about the Holodomor and the other genocides in my course, students create a memorial. It can be in any form, a video memorial, audio memorial, posters, monuments, and we actually display this in the school. So students give a presentation and also display this in the school foyer or in the hallway, and this gives the opportunity for other students to learn about the Holodomor who might not be taking the genocide course. So it's all about spreading awareness and getting students to become actively involved in their communities and seeking justice.
Продовжили сесію методики викладання про Голодомор для старшокласників Надія Прокопчук та Дейвід Кацман з Саскачевану.
Ми створили навчальний ресурс для учителів середніх шкіл і для всіх тих, хто цікавиться знати більше про цю тему. Але це дійсно це є розділ для вчителів, для всіх тих, хто може вчителює в рідній школі чи у звичайній школі. І підхід зовсім підхідний до звичайного підходу, навчального підходу, яким користуються всі вчителі у Канаді.
We are showing our resource. It's entirely online. It's entirely free. It always has a video component where people who have a personal and deep connection to the issue speak. And then we provide all the background information so that students are enlightened and they understand the whole story, the good parts and the ugly parts.
Після сесії методики на місцях відбулися дискусії, де учасники конференції обмінювалися думками та задавали питання презентаторам.